So, I'm pretty sure everybody has seen this tree by now, and specifically this node that kind of seems a little bit useless, right? To be honest, especially in my specific context, but in general, I believe this node can be really, really good on early progression builds that naturally don't have all that many sockets and can utilize this once, maybe during leveling, but it's a bit harder to get your setup because this node can be acquired as early as Act 5 according to the Q&A session, right? And especially I find this interesting for builds that use essentially some kind of skill or whatever and a low socket count naturally already during early mapping progression. One of the examples there is Poisonous Concoction. There is the Pathfinder Poison version that essentially, or one of the more popular ways there is to play Poisonous Concoction during leveling and then keeping it until like level 80 or so in order to swap into a poison-based Pathfinder kind of thing, like, I don't know, Exsanguinate, EK, and no, I don't want to talk about the additional EK nerfs right now. Essentially these type of builds. And I've brought you an example for the Poisonous Concoction one in a second. Because one of these two modifiers, either the 50% all res or 30% movement speed, can be essentially guaranteed to be active in this early progression. And there's even a way, specifically with Pconc, to get both of them in. So, like, once you finish maps, and it's very difficult to make this work, but the opportunity is there, and I don't want you to miss out on the opportunity if you randomly have it, right? From early maps until like level 80, you can do an interesting setup. Let's take this example here. I made like, you need to look at the left side of the screen right now. I made like a mock-up character here of a typical Poisonous Concoction thing. We'll shortly go over that. These items here, they are just placeholders for, these are random boots and random shield and random helmet and random unset ring. Okay. The key pieces typically during progression, there are definitely Embalmer, Mark of Submission, and at some point you want some kind of Dendrobate, right? Especially as soon as you like fixed your dexterity and your intelligence. So these slots are kind of filled, and one of them houses, the Embalmer typically houses your Poisonous Concoction. So having no sockets in your gloves is kind of out of the question, but lucky enough that is the health one anyway, and who needs more max life in softcore, right? It's not the interesting one. So typically what happens, you have your Poisonous Concoction falling in your Embalmer. You have a Mark of Submission with a curse, either Temporal Chains or Despair or something like that. So this is kind of fixed. Dendrobate is an early acquisition you would like to make, but nothing needs to be socketed into that. Poisonous Concoction inherently has a chance to poison and is housed in here. So there can be random gems in there. You're only getting this for the 300 dexterity, 150 intelligence boosts on your damage with poison and your increased poison duration. So what that means typically is you end up with 3 additional toolings. You have your Plague Bearer with increased area of effect, you have your Shield Charge with your faster attacks, and you have your Molten Shell with cast with damage taken. Especially because you can't really left-click this, because you already left-click that, and nobody wants to manually use Molten Shell. So that's kind of the starting point you can get into there. And if you look at this gem distribution, then you have a lot of space. Even if your Dendrobate is only a 4-link, which you can easily guarantee, you have, it's assumed this one is filled, you can guarantee a 4-linked helmet in these colors, right? So naturally, this is automatically 30% movement speed, just by default, without any special tricks, and everybody can achieve that. Same thing here, you can move these gems down there, and you have 50 all-res. And honestly, 50 all-res on a Pathfinder build that tends to go ahead in the next steps, and just by default doesn't need much resistance on the gear anyway, because of consistent flaws and permanent flaws. This might help you into a progression where you basically never have any or very little resistance on your gear, which is really cool because it opens the suffixes for easier access to attributes to hit your dexterity and intelligence, and also way easier to get life regeneration if you don't need attribute resistances. Also, not needing resistances on gear makes gear kind of cheap. Just imagine you find boots, I mean, ignore the specific boot, with like, I don't know, like a really high movement speed roll, but no life and no resistance. It's a pretty worthless piece for most people, especially if it's like an early base. But you could pick that up, craft life, and be fine because you need so little resistance. So I find that really, really interesting. And that's like basically you can guarantee this without any special luck, without doing anything. 100% one of them is fine. And as said, you can even maybe you already get it done during the campaign. It's a bit of a stretch, right? But you could at least try. So, how? Or basically, what's the case of freeing both? There is one setup, and there's an issue with that setup, obviously. You could go ahead and get a Dendrobate like this. Obviously, getting a 6-socket Dendrobate is kind of complicated, right? But first, let's move the gems, right? So what you would have is something like this. Let's move this up a little bit. And you still have your boots, and if you move this like this. Okay, let's go over this. So you would need a 6-socket Dendrobate that only has these 2 links. Obviously, if you like click a fusing and you end up with something like this, you have even the opportunity to put this 2 link in here, because these don't need to be linked, and in some cases cannot even be linked. You need to be a bit careful with that, because that increases your reservation, but you can move gems around. Also very interesting on this like rather specific setup is you don't have anything on your shield like an aura that turns off during weapon swap, which is really cool, I find. And also you don't have Withering Stab in your weapon, because then also if you do like your weapon swap, or same with Molten Shell, with these 2, then it removes it from the left click, and that I find really annoying. So you cannot have auras in your weapons, I feel like, and the other ones where you have in your left click, you cannot do that either. So on this very specific setup, the only thing we lose to an extent is our cast when damage taken on Molten Shell. So that automation is essentially gone. So you need to decide, do you want left click Molten Shell, or do you want left click Withering Step, and kind of press the other. So that would be the sacrifice. So question is now, how do we get this, right? How do we get a 6-socket? It's not linked, but 6-socket Dendrobate. Honestly, it comes down to luck. If you manage to snipe one early somehow, this might be really, really useful. Also keep in mind that this is like super early, right? This is on a way to 80. So your resources are super limited. And if you have a look a little bit at the calculations there, how do I find this again? Here. So if you have a Dendrobate with 6 sockets, just the item itself, getting the necessary colors is really easy. Like that's doable even first hour of the league. Very much possible. Not hitting the blue one would be an option. It's like even cheaper, so that's an option to do that as well. But let's assume we need that. We want this thing really, really cheap. What if we only have a 5-socket item, right? Then this changes to almost 50 chromes with quite a standard deviation, to be honest. So that means this is significantly less affordable, I find. So basically getting a 5-socket one, I mean, you can give it a shot, and you're also losing the blue socket. If you have one anyway, throwing a few chromes, maybe you hit it, might be an opportunity there, but essentially you would need a 6-socket one to get basically into this. In terms of crafting for that, you say, I mean, you can just bench craft it, right? I mean, that's 350 jewelers. Bench crafting for 70 jewelers of 5-socket, it's kind of out of the question as well. I mean, as said, it's just the first 3 hours. If you randomly get a 6-socket Dendrobate, this is very viable, I think. Then it's really, really cool. If you can snipe one, you need a 6-socket one later anyway, so you can 6-link it yourself. So if you snipe a good one of them early somehow for cheap, it's definitely worth it, because you can continue using it and you're just going to corrupt and 6-link it later. So there's an option, right? So getting 2 of them, honestly, like getting 2 of these completely free is a bit difficult. And as said, if you actually have the 5-link situation, you could remove increased area of effect, right? Let's move them over here and go with like a 5-link option like this. I don't know if you want to do that, if that's worth it. I mean, the increased area of effect on Plague Bearer is really, really interesting. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure if you want to do that. But as said, you don't have to go all that crazy. You can just go ahead and say, okay, I want the resistance already and not worry about that. This you can guarantee into maps easily. And then you don't even need an unset ring, right? You can have a normal ring, which makes stuff better as well. You can do this, or you can say, no, I want to like move 30% faster. I mean, if you have 30% boots plus this new thing, you basically have a 7 league step into league start, and that is insanely cool. Other than that, for this like early progression kind of stuff here, obviously, as if you go into most poison builds, then later on, you don't even want to be Warden of the Magi, right? But honestly, if you get this early, this is basically free just by encountering them, if I understand. And I mean, if you do more of the new forest affliction stuff, you could even maybe get a tincture. You can look into that if you're going into it anyway, or you just don't. Issue with that is a little bit, then later on you typically want to switch to a different ascendancy there. That means you kind of need to redo that. But I believe that doing these quests for them is going to be so quick, and I have I don't see any issues with like redoing it and swapping your ascendancy later, because I believe getting this honestly is gonna make your life way easier if you decide to be a poison Pathfinder dude. Yeah. That's it. Bye.